I am going to postpone the discussion of vocabulary alternates. Today I'm going to talk about causality. So I want to express somehow that something that happened caused something else, which may be in a very direct way or in a loose way, and we have different ways of expressing that. So let's start out at looking at the conjunctions. So we can get to this by clicking on the Ontology and Lexicon menu in the upper left and then selecting Ontology. And then we can select conjunctions. So one of the conjunctions we have is so. And if you look at the gloss or definition in the fifth column, or I can see that if I just hover the mouse over the letter A in the second column, it says it follows that, not strictly logical, like therefore. So we have so and we have therefore. So therefore, it logically follows that. So to show you a couple of examples, this first sentence says, the person that followed Jesus saw Jesus. So that person / disciple was happy. Now the intent here is that person that followed Jesus is our explication for disciple. So this might be converted by a rule into disciple. There are two things that you need to be careful about to make that work. First of all, there's more than one sense of follow, and we want the sense that is follow the example of a person rather than to walk behind a person. There are two senses for the word follow. Secondly, we have to set the feature on follow that shows that this is something that routinely happens. A person that routinely follows Jesus is a disciple. The / terminology here is to indicate that I've paired the complex concept disciple with person. And I showed you how to do that a couple of times before. So the idea here is that in some sense, because this person saw Jesus, that person was happy. But it was a consequence. It wasn't like a logical conclusion. And the second sentence illustrates the case of a logical conclusion. People should worship God. Jesus is God. Therefore, people should worship Jesus. So that's a logical statement. So let's go back to the terms in the ontology and see some of the other ones. There are a bunch of different forms of then. The most common one is the temporal succession. Something happened, then another thing happened. But there's also a logical conclusion then, which seems pretty similar to therefore. And there's a consequence then, which seems fairly similar to so. So because something happened, something else happened. And then there's thus, which is somewhat different. If something happened and because of the way it was done, something else, then you can use thus. The other way to express a causal relationship is with a subordinate clause using a relation. So I'm going to go to relations now by selecting the semantic category of relations. And one of the simple ones is because. So I mentioned before that there are two versions of because. Because A says the following event is the reason for the preceding event. John walked to school because his car was at the shop. And for B, the second sense of because is the following object is the reason of the event. Because of Jesus, I am happy. There, because introduces a noun, Jesus, because of Jesus. So, to illustrate that, we could say, because people saw Jesus, those people were happy. There are other forms of because that are kind of similar, but slightly different. There's although. Although something happened, another thing will happen. So that's expressing something that you wouldn't expect the other thing to happen if the first thing happens. Another one very similar to that is even though. It says contrary to fact. Even though so-and-so, something happened. That also uses a clause, even though an event. This one's pretty similar, even if something happens, then something else will happen. Then I'd like to talk about another one that I use quite often, and this is so. You see there are three senses of so. Now these are the relation so's, not the conjunction so. The conjunction occurs at the start of a sentence, and these occur in a clause. So there are three senses here. We're not currently using sense B, which is result with no intent. We're using A and C. So A says, if I hover the mouse over the A, the proceeding was done so that the following can or could be done. John studied so that he could pass the test. So he did it so that he would be able to pass the test. So it has the association with the word could. The other one is similar, but we associate it with the word would. The proceeding was or should be done, resulting in the following being done. John covered his face so that he would not catch a cold. So he did the first thing so that the other thing would not happen, so that it will not happen. So if I go to the examples, I'm going to show these two uses of so. So in the fourth sentence here, that person went from that person's house so that that person could talk to Jesus. So since Jesus was outside, that person had to go out in order to meet Jesus and to talk with him. And the last one, so it has a to be able to or could meaning. The last sentence shows so that something would happen, so that it will happen. That person told the man about Jesus so that that man would love Jesus. So he did the first thing, the telling, so that this thing would happen, that that man would love Jesus. By the way, it seems like when I use this construction, it usually it's confused about having these two that's together, so I usually have to correct it in the phase 2. You'll see that two words will pop up and it will want you to delete one, and after you delete one of them you won't get the other meaning, but that can be fixed up in the phase 2. Anyway, this is the way you could write it in the phase 1. And that's all I have for today. Thanks for listening.